Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, the NBA was dominated with a style of play that was so transformative that it forced league officials to change the rules. This playing style not only manipulated the rules that were set in place, but also took advantage of narrow-minded individuals who shunned away innovation. Offenses relied heavily on players beating their matchup in a one-on-one setting, and due to there not being that many dominant perimeter-oriented players, most teams just leaned heavily on their interior presence. However, all of that changed during the early to mid-2000s with an abundance of rule changes that shifted the league's focus to more perimeter-oriented play. Then, to combat the perimeter-oriented offense, defenses became more tactical and sophisticated the way that they utilized zone and sent over help. And then once that happened, offenses then made adjustments and evolved their style of play. And then after that, defenses made some more adjustments and changes, and then offenses continued to evolve, and then defenses started to evolve even more. And then offenses started to evolve once more, and then defenses evolved, and then bam, the three-point boom emerged. And then right when we were on the precipice of offensive innovation really starting to take off, big men as we knew it were as grounded as ever. Long gone were these slow, physically imposing big men that dominated an offense, and to replace them were these screen and roll figures that played more of a complementary role in their offense. And then you had teams that were willing to experiment with lineups that didn't even feature a big man at all, further challenging the true value of what a center could provide to their team. But then something happened. Fast forward to where we are today, and for the better part of the last 2 years, not only are there prominent figures who play the power forward and center position, but also you can easily argue between Giannis, Jokic, and Embiid, they have been 3 of the top 5 to 6 players in the NBA, which is something that we have not seen since the early 2000s. So what exactly is going on? Because it definitely feels like the big men are back and as talented as ever. First, let's talk about defense. Back in the day, as a big man, your role on that side of the floor was to anchor the defense. Protecting the rim and defending the best post player more or less was all of their responsibility. And with there being no limitations on how long a defensive player can stand in the paint, the simplistic nature of these defensive roles for big men were very impactful. With the expectations of being a rim protector and post defender being the standard that was set for many big men for several years, height, weight, and overall size was viewed as massive advantages for most bigs. But now fast forward to where we are today, and one could easily argue that some of those advantages would now be viewed as weaknesses. Now, this phenomenon occurred for several reasons, but the biggest factor is that the league just became more perimeter oriented, and with more scoring happening further away from the basket, the impact that traditional big men had on the defensive end started to diminish. To address this, the focus on how great of a defender a big man was shifted from how well can he defend this one area to how well can he defend multiple areas on the floor. And you can clearly see this concept being adapted by younger big men in this league. Players like Triple J, Bam Adebayo, Rob Williams, all big men who do an excellent job at being versatile defensively. But the two players that come to mind who've been elite in this aspect for several years has to be Draymond Green and Giannis Antetokounmpo, as their defensive IQ, reflex, and motor has aided them tremendously in being very impactful in multiple aspects of the game defensively. Great transition play, defending in passing lanes, excellent with multiple coverages and pick and roll settings, and having the ability to be competent one-on-one defenders, and that's regardless if it's in space or if it's in the post. But what's really valuable with Giannis and Draymond is that they give you the versatility that most teams are looking for defensively, while still giving you traditional value, which is rim protection. So far this year, the numbers don't really back this up too much for Draymond, and you can certainly argue some of that may have to do with him sliding out of his prime. But for the better part of the last 4 to 5 seasons, both players have been really good at holding the opposing team to the low 50s at the rim, which would easily make them some of the best rim protectors in the NBA. Now, please don't get me wrong, there's still space in today's NBA for traditional rim protecting bigs. Rudy Gobert has practically built a Hall of Fame career out of it. However, with offensive schemes becoming much more complex, being versatile defensively is so valuable that it's basically immeasurable.
Look at Bam move his feet. That's impressive what he's doing defensively.
Now let's talk about the offensive end of the game, in more particular, passing and playmaking. Because throughout NBA history, the idea of a big man being the best passer or playmaker on your team was very rarely explored. But in today's game, having a big man who is a competent passer is something that we're starting to see a bit more frequently, and what's even more impressive is that big men have the ability to put pressure on the defense off the dribble, which further opens up more passing lanes. And because of their height advantage, big men can do this in several different ways. They're playmaking bigs who may not have the greatest offensive package, so to complement their teammates, they take upon a pseudo point guard role from time to time. The best example of this is obviously Draymond Green, who shares the court with not only all-time great floor spacing, but also very impressive player movement, which allows him to find open teammates either at the three-point line or cutting to the basket. And then you have big men who are very comfortable dribbling the ball, and then with the pressure that they put on the defense as they drive to the basket, they then have the awareness to find open teammates. Players such as Randall and Sabonis have really grown in this aspect over the past couple of years, but easily the player who's been able to transform himself into a great passer thanks to his rim pressure has to be Giannis, as he's not only able to put a lot of pressure on the opposing team in transition while still punishing them by making the right reads, but so far this year, and it really carried over from last postseason run, even in a half-court set, he has been much better at finding open three-point shooters to the point where he looks very emboldened to try passes that I do not believe he would have tried just a couple of years ago, which makes it feels like he's much more aware of how the defense is helping to find the open shooter. And then you have the more traditional route with post play. Sabonis immediately comes to mind as someone who excels in this aspect, but also Joel Embiid so far this year has looked mightily impressive. In the early stages of his career, some of Embiid's biggest plights were his tunnel vision and the lack of three-point shooting that was surrounding him that aided him in falling victim to double teams. However, this season he's certainly grown with his patience, which has allowed him to properly read the defense and find his open teammates. And as a result, I truly believe that this plays a factor into why he's been so dominant this year, because the defense really has to make a decision on either staying home or helping, because they know that he's now willing to punish them with a quick pass. But as we all know, all of these players pale in comparison to what Nikola Jokic has done for the better part of the last 4 years now. His ability to play, make, and pass has transcended to a point where putting him in a box as the best passing big man of all time is actually doing him a disservice, because in my opinion, he should be in the conversation of being one of the best passers in NBA history, regardless of position. He's amazing in transition, even better out of the post. He's grown as a driver to the basket, especially when a defender bites on a pump fake and still making the right reads to an open player. But what really separates him from his contemporaries is that he can be a lethal passer without necessarily being a dominant scorer during that same possession, which is very impressive, especially during plays where he's nowhere near the basket, he's completely out of the play, and yet can still make the proper reads and make sure that his team has a very viable option to score the basketball. And the reason why passing abilities for big men have evolved over the years has a lot to do with the development of the scoring skill set that they have obtained. See, outside of a few elbow jumpers, traditionally speaking, the identity of a big man and his ability to score has been heavily dependent on his ability to get as close as possible to the basket. And even in today's game, that still is true. But with a prominent push towards perimeter play, there have been two significant changes into the scoring profile for bigs. The first being the ability to be a dribble drive threat, which is something I touched upon in the previous section as a passer, but of course there are plenty of players who have the ability to put the ball on the deck, drive to the basket, and be consistent finishers, as Giannis has easily been the best player to perfect this aspect of being a scoring threat. And the other scoring development is taking the occasional elbow jumpers that big men have usually attempted and spacing that all the way to the three-point line. Players such as Embiid, Jokic, Vucevic, and Randall during a contract year have all added this to their scoring profile to help complement the rest of their game. However, there is a big who's taken the next step and made the three ball a larger portion of his scoring profile, and that player is Karl Anthony Towns. As Towns' accuracy from behind the arc has averaged out to be 40%, and what makes it even more impressive is the volume is so high that you might actually mistake his box score for a perimeter player. And with that lethal combination of volume and accuracy, Towns has easily made an argument for himself that he is the best shooting big man in NBA history. Now, of course, on the surface level, being a respectable three-point shooter ideally means that you are a more efficient scorer. However, the benefits of having your power forward and or center space the floor out all the way to the three-point line extends much further than just more efficient scoring. as offensive schemes and identities will continue to grow and be much more complex, and more importantly, open up better driving and passing lanes for the rest of the team. And consequently, this also means that it makes it much more difficult for the opposing team to scheme against that offense. Now, to be fair, we've seen this happen throughout NBA history. However, I believe the turning point where this chess game that is being played amongst coaches became much more normal is during the mid-2010s when Chris Bosh was being spaced all the way to the three-point line as a center, forcing several coaches like Frank Vogel and Greg Popovich to make really tough decisions with their personnel. And actually, this phenomenon gave us one of the most iconic three-point shots in NBA history, as Popovich removed Duncan off the floor during a very pivotal moment and feared that the 37-year-old wouldn't be quick enough to close out on three-pointers. And just like that, everything gets tied together just perfectly as we go back to the importance of defensive versatility with power forwards and centers. See, if there is one thing that I want you to gain from this video, is that everything happens for a reason. Cause and effect, if you will. Because big men were really dominant throughout the 90s and early 2000s, it affected the rules that were set in place to make the game more perimeter oriented. And because the NBA was so successful with their rule changes, producing some of the most potent perimeter players the league has ever seen, it affected the impact that big men had on the game of basketball. And because the production of big men were marginalized, it affected the role that they had on teams, so much so that some organizations were willing to experiment with no big men at all. Which brings us to where we are right now. Going small might have given you short-term success, but now we're at a stage in NBA history where bigs are so talented that if you don't have the proper matchups, they will dominate you to the tune of their predecessors. And if you're still skeptical, just look around. It's the reason why we have more volume scoring big men. It's the reason why every championship contending team over the past 2 years now, their first or second best player has either been a power forward or center. It's the reason why Giannis and Jokic have won the last 3 MVPs, and possibly Embiid is this year's MVP. Which leads me back to my theory. Because after all of these things have occurred over the past 20 plus years, the league might go back to where it once was. Because thanks to the small ball movement, it actually gave a blueprint for what big men are expected to do in a more perimeter oriented league. And when given time to adapt, what it has produced is easily the most skillful set of power forwards and centers the league has ever seen. And now these physically imposing, skillful players are present in an era of basketball where practically every team heavily relies on a smaller lineup, which I theorize will bring us back to an era of basketball being dominated by big men. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Man, I really enjoyed making this video because it really came together at the end of it. So I'm pretty proud of myself, no cap. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button and notification bell if you enjoy these type of videos so you can be updated when I upload. We're at the tail end of the regular season, entering the playoffs. So if you love NBA content, not only you can find it here, but also on my second channel and on Twitch. All links will be in the description. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.